Imagine feeding an entire city. Now make that city move again before sunset. No trucks, no refrigeration, no modern depots, no reliable paved roads. People need bread. Animals need fodder and water. Equipment needs workers. If one handoff is late, the whole column slows. In some of the empire's largest campaigns, the moving population could approach the scale of 100,000. Not every campaign was this large, and historical estimates vary. 100,000 is therefore a plausible scale question for a very large campaign, not a universal Ottoman army count. And army meant more than fighting troops. A moving expedition could extend beyond formal combat troops to engineers, road and bridge workers, artisans, transport laborers, and animal handlers. Food was only one demand among fodder, equipment, repair work, transport, and information. The real question is urgent. Could the empire keep this moving population supplied while its destination kept changing? At Uyvar, one part of this system came under visible pressure, and the immediate problem was not an enemy attack on the supplies. The answer ran through a chain of handoffs, from order to grain, from grain to store, from store to load, and from load to road. This film follows that hidden chain, and the points where it could break. The first handoff could happen before the main army even appeared. Orders traveled ahead. They identified routes and halting places, called for provisions and fodder, and demanded attention to transport, roads, and bridges. Then the document reached a district. A local official had to turn writing into action, measure grain, find animals, organize labor, inspect a road, and meet a deadline. The order had moved faster than the army. Now people on the route had to make it real. One important intermediary was the Qada, a local judge administrator. He could receive campaign instructions and help coordinate assessments and deliveries. Other appointed officials checked and routed supplies. Guilds selected and financed artisans for campaign service. Those artisans prepared food and drink, and made or repaired clothing, animal equipment, weapons, and other necessities that kept the column usable. Battle paintings placed soldiers at the center. The supply chain also depended on judges, craftsmen, handlers, and workers behind them. But an order on paper is not food in a mouth. So how did a written demand actually become a sack of grain? That is the next handoff, turning an order into something that could actually move. How did the state turn demand into grain? It could require grain in kind. One form of that obligation was called nüzul. The burden was apportioned through avarız fiscal units, which were not necessarily literal families living under one roof. By the late 16th century, one such household could be an assessment unit based on fiscal capacity. That is why the paperwork needs care. A count of fiscal units is not automatically a population count, and grain assessed on paper is not yet grain delivered to an army. There was no single, timeless Ottoman food tax. In-kind delivery, cash substitution, compulsory sale, and state purchase shifted with time and place. A transaction recorded as a purchase could still be compulsory in practice. Rules and stated prices did not make the exchange freely negotiated. But compulsion did not make every collection uncontrolled looting either. Officials measured, allocated, and recorded what communities owed. The system could be organized and coercive at the same time. This distinction changes how every number must be read. A recorded assessment is not proof that anyone was fed. The next stage is where that gap opens. Even successful collection only opened another link. Grain could be gathered in stores along a route. wheat could become peksimet, a hard bread made for storage and movement. Then someone had to measure it, load it, guard it, and send it toward an army that might no longer be where planners expected. The records capture different moments: assessed, collected, delivered, distributed, consumed. Those are 5 different claims. A number written in a register records a quantity at one stage. It does not prove a meal at the end of the chain. Early 16th century accounts make the distinction visible. Grain was divided among different military and service categories, including technical corps and stables. Campaigns could also record different balances between flour and barley. The useful surprise is not a giant modern total. It is that the administration counted different needs, while historians still have to ask what each number represents. The grain existed in the record. Whether it reached the right store, the right cart, and the right people was another series of handoffs. In 1663, one of those handoffs came under visible pressure during a real campaign. In 1663, that chain was tested on the road to Uyvar. The administration had prepared. Advance orders called on local officials to arrange provisions, fodder, and transport along the route. But high water and difficult ground disrupted movement. Then strategy changed. Some supplies had been prepared for a different theater, while the army turned toward a new destination. The order had been written, the grain had been directed, the campaign had moved. Near Uyvar, narrative sources used by the campaign study reported soldiers demanding bread and threatening to stop fighting. The episode is vivid, but its limits matter. It comes from a restricted source base. It is not account of hunger, not evidence that the entire Ottoman army was starving, and not a model for every campaign. It is evidence of pressure at one siege. A system could issue orders, collect supplies, and prepare a route, and still fail to place bread where soldiers needed it. Grain in the right region could still be useless if movement broke down. The episode also exposes a wider vulnerability. The animals used to move supplies created demands of their own. To understand that vulnerability, look at the animals behind the army. Horses, mules, camels, and other transport animals increased what a column could carry. They also needed fodder, water, handlers, and rest. Barley for stables appears explicitly in early campaign accounts. Here is the paradox. Every animal that solved one transport problem created another supply problem. The animals carried the supply. They also consumed part of it. No supported universal ratio tells us how their needs compared with human consumption. The evidence supports the burden, not false precision. Pack animals could be preferable to carts, where roads or transport habits made wheels less practical, but each choice moved the bottleneck. A cart needed a usable surface and draft power. A pack train needed animals, handlers, fodder, and rest. More carrying capacity created more demand, and supplies in the right town still meant little if the cart never came. The carrier refused, the bridge failed, or mud stopped the animals. Animals alone could not remove the bottleneck. Across hundreds of kilometers, the next handoffs ran through roads, major rivers, and workers who could also refuse or leave. Roads were only part of the answer. During the Long War, the Danube and Tisa corridors helped carry provisions, weapons, and other material toward Hungary. Supply could cross the Black Sea to ports such as Varna, continue by wagon and draft animal to the Danube, then move onward by boat. This was not one unbroken conveyor. At every transfer, crews, animals, roads, rivercraft, timing, and security had to align. Each mode expanded the network. Each transfer created one more point of failure. Then weather and labor entered the equation. Mud, snow, flooding, and bad roads slowed armies and transport animals. Local arrangements helped maintain roads, bridges, paving, fortresses, and security. But maintenance did not eliminate geography. Workers could also resist. In a reported example from 1638, carriers assigned to move rice and hard bread fled. The record proves a labor bottleneck. Their precise motive remains uncertain. No enemy had captured the food, yet the final movement still failed. Does that make collapse the normal condition of the system? The long war provides the counterweight. Uyvar shows pressure, not the normal condition of every Ottoman campaign. The long war provides the counterweight. Across repeated operations in Hungary, provisioning involved deliberate government direction, and the Danube and Tisa increased the capacity to move supplies. Historian Gabor Agostin characterizes this system as generally capable of preventing chronic army-wide shortages. That does not mean transport was uninterrupted, cheap, or humane. It means the network could sustain repeated military effort when enough links held. The surprise is not perfection. It is that such a vulnerable chain could work again and again. That also overturns two familiar pictures. The empire did not send every sack from Istanbul. Route communities, provincial administrations, depots, purchases, carts, animals, ships, and rivercraft all contributed. Nor did the army simply wander across the countryside, living off whatever it found. Planned assessments and purchases coexisted with local extraction and improvisation. The system was neither a perfect central machine nor pure foraging. The final question returns to the moving city. What turned this vulnerable network into military reach? So what kept the moving city alive? Not one tax, not one warehouse, not one road. Orders became local action. Local demands and purchases became stores. Stores became loads. Loads crossed roads, ports, and rivers. Workers and animals had to be supplied while moving the supply. At every step, the state depended on a judge, an artisan, a handler, a carrier, a boat crew, or a community doing the next piece of work. Administrative reach became operational power only when people completed the chain. That power remained vulnerable because every handoff was real. A recorded assessment might not be fully collected. Collected grain might not be delivered. Delivered food might not reach the people waiting for it. A bridge could fail. A carrier could refuse. A destination could change. Uyvar shows one moment when the final promise came under pressure. The Long War shows that the wider network could nevertheless sustain repeated operations. Ottoman logistics was not a machine that erased friction. It was a continuing effort to overcome friction before the army stopped. The moving city survived only while orders became grain, grain became loads, and loads kept moving. That achievement rested on planning, roads, rivers, animals, and skilled work. It also rested on extraction, coercion, and communities carrying costs they did not freely choose. The chain gave the empire reach. Its failures exposed the distance between an order and a meal. And once food, fodder, and labor were moving, an even heavier problem remained. How did the Ottomans move siege guns across roads that could barely carry